Good evening, folks. It's WRFU up here, banner 104.5 FM, broadcasting live from our new studio as usual. Fortunate to have a brand new guest with us, but I give you the legal disclaimer as always. WRFU is an open forum for the Banner Champaign. Community views expressed are those of the speakers and not intended to represent WRFU, UCIMC, the Banner Socialist Forum, the Airshifters, UPTV, UI Channel 7, or anyone else, man. The speakers are those of the speakers, views are those of the speakers and them alone. To my left, to the right on the camera screen, we have a new scholar. Can you tell us who you are and where you're coming from?
I'm Chris Benson. I'm an associate professor in journalism and African American studies at the University of Illinois here in Urbana.
Fantastic. Thank you for coming with us today. We're very privileged to have him here today. This is actually an interview I've been trying to get for some time, for those of you that don't know out there, right? I've been on his coattails for probably at least a year, at least. People may be taken aback sometimes because I say that and not realizing that it is the truth. Like I had the privilege of interviewing Professor Jennings a while back, and it took me a while, but I was committed and dedicated. But we're going to have a special conversation today. A special conversation about your book. Go ahead, you can put the book cover up now for those of you that don't know. Give them the title.
Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America, the story of Emmett Till and his mother.
For those of you that don't know out there, this is a book in a situation which sort of galvanized the civil rights movement and sort of got the emotional fabric of the country to be moving in the same direction. Why don't you tell us a little bit first off of what was the motivation behind writing the book? Because a lot of people may not know first off about the story.
Well, I actually wrote the book with Mamie Till-Mobley, Emmett Till's mother, in the last 6 months of her life, actually. We worked on the book. We met, and she knew I was a writer, and she just blurted out. She said, I've always wanted to write a book. And it took about a split second for me to decide that this really could be about the most important thing that I ever did. So we began working on it immediately. And as I say, we spent the last 6 months of her life between June 2002 and she died in January 2003, capturing her story. I'd interview her for hours and hours and hours and days and during those months and put all of those interviews together into one coherent story that touches on the relationship of the mother and son, which is really quite touching. Mm-hmm. We come to know Emmett Till as a fully developed person who spent 14 years with his mother, becoming that person. A story about history and all the things that you mentioned about how this lynching helped to inspire people to get involved in the fledgling civil rights movement. And then it also has a sort of a spiritual component because it shows how Mother Mobley actually found a mission in life, and it inspires people when they read this to think of some way that they can make a difference in their lives in this contemporary moment. So it's got quite a bit of significance.
And how did you meet her? Because what was the circumstance under which you two were brought together?
Yeah, I met her through a mutual friend, a writer, a collaborator of mine who had worked with her on developing her story as a play. He's a playwright in Chicago, an award-winning playwright. And he did pretty much the same thing. He had talked to her for hours and developed a play dramatizing the events surrounding Emmett Till's murder, basically. And so I wrote a story about him and that work for Chicago Magazine, was only able to talk to her for a short while on the telephone, and as it turned out, the editor at Chicago Magazine cut that part of the story out. Oh. So her quote never really appeared, and I always felt badly about that, so I kept telling him, I want to meet her in person, I want to meet her, and that's when he set it up, and we went by her place in, as I say, June 2002, and things just started immediately.
It's crazy. You get brought into different people's lives together like that.
Yeah.
So you're writing this book with her. Why don't you tell people a little about the actual book and the contents? Because we've touched on what the subject matter is, but people, unfortunately, because of education system, and even though we're in a digital age, people don't know this story.
Yeah, that's true, and it's really unfortunate that this story is not told as much in the schools as it was early on, right. And it's not told accurately even when it's told, and that's one thing I found in doing extensive research to put this book together. But Emmett Till was a 14-year-old Chicago kid in 1955 who traveled to Tiny Money, Mississippi in August of 1955 to visit his relatives. He was a really bright and energetic kid who saw this 2-week period that he was going to spend in Mississippi as the vacation of a lifetime. Well, it's 1955, and we're still dealing with the American system of apartheid, Jim Crow, in the South, and everybody's up in arms because Brown versus Board of Education had just been handed down by the Supreme Court. Brown 1 in 1954, Brown 2 in 1955, which redefined our legal rights, our legal positions as African Americans as against whites. And so whites in the South, upset about losing their dominance or the threat of that losing that dominance, were fighting back. Emmett Till walks into that situation as a bright and energetic Chicago kid who knew no boundaries,
Right.
and stepped over the line, basically.
How did he step over the line?
There was an incident at a store in the little town near where he was staying, where he whistled in the presence of a white woman. There are 3 different stories that got handed down. Either he whistled as a prank, as a 14-year-old kid out of Chicago, not really understanding what that would mean in Mississippi. Some people say it might have even been a dare that some other people put him up to it. There was a story about him whistling at a checker move. There was a porch outside the store where checker games were going on all the time, and he was impressed by a move and whistled at that, and the white woman was offended because she was there. The final story is that he whistled to clear his throat, as his mother had taught him. He had a terrible stutter, and she taught him when he got stuck on a word that he should stop, regain his composure, take a deep breath, and just whistle to steady his voice. And that story was told by one of his cousins who was there at the time. And when Mother Mobley heard that story, it really resonated with her, because what happened after that was that the woman's husband and his half-brother came looking for Emmett. They took him out, tortured him, beat him over the course of several hours, finally cut him up and shot him and dumped his body in the river with a 75-pound gin fan tied around his neck with barbed wire. So the reason that story resonated with Mother Mobley is that she began to think, well, the one thing I taught my son to help him have a better life, to get through this stuttering, might in the end have cost him his life, if that was in fact the way, the way this thing unfolded. So she had to live with that for the rest of her life, basically. 2 other cousins who were there at the time say, it was really a prank. This is a kid who was, boisterous and active as a kid in Chicago, who didn't know that could be
was in the South.
Yeah, that could be a capital offense in the South. So, the point is, though, that whatever the fact is, there's nothing that we heard that came out of that situation that would have justified what was done to Emmett Till.
Of course not, And it's unfortunate how that circumstance in a lot of ways ties into, you take that from circumstance in the 1950s and look today, 2011, in Jackson, Mississippi, where I think it was Troy, was it not? Gentleman who was randomly killed, 40-something-year-old African-American male, randomly, a few young Caucasian men with their friends got in a car and went and decided to find a random black person and beat them to death. It really is not that far off from that circumstance in terms of the ignorance that pervades throughout the country and the way we deny circumstances like that, unfortunately.
Well, the thing about it is that this is a story that happened more than 55 years ago. This is something that happened that far ago. So it's in the distant memory of even people who lived through it. But it really does have a lot of significance in our contemporary moment for reasons like that. That we're still seeing hate crime, ethnoviolence, as we prefer to call it now. People who
makes it sound in vogue almost, like ethnoviolence.
Well, because when we call it hate crime, which is how it's defined in the law, it tends to focus on the individual. And so what we think is that these are crimes that are committed by people who are dysfunctional, they have issues, problems, and they're acting out those problems through violence.
Right. It's not race related.
Yeah, but when we characterize it as ethnoviolence, we're dealing with the structure of racism. We're dealing with the structure of difference in this country. And then you begin to understand that these crimes are not just about bad individuals doing bad things to other people. It's about power hierarchy, and that's what I teach my students in a course I teach at university on hate crimes. That hate crime is about bias more than hate, and it's about power more than bias. Because ultimately what you're doing is you're dealing with a construct that always places people of color at the lower levels of the hierarchy. Mm-hmm. And ethnoviolence is really an enforcement tool to keep them in their place. So that's why I say this story still has some resonance in the contemporary moment, because we can see Emmett Till living under this, visiting a region under the system of harsh enforcement of separation. But what we can begin to realize is that so many other people are subjected to similar kinds of acts of violence when they step out of their assigned place, even in this moment. And what I'm beginning to do is shape up a narrative that connects Emmett Till to Barack Obama, because you can see some similarities. Now, is Barack Obama likely to be lynched? No, but he's gotten more death threats than any other president in our history. He was the first candidate to receive Secret Service protection, even during the campaign. But more to the point, we begin to see the expression of this power language, the coded language of race and race hatred, that begins infusing itself into the normal discourse that's even reported by the media. So we begin to see Barack Obama characterized as the other and the threat, and a person who has stepped out of his assigned place, and there has to be pushback. And you can hear it in the campaigns. We've got to take back our country. Take back from what? Take back from
another
who?
American, yeah.
Yeah.
Or even the incident to Osama instead of Obama being inserted into their subconscious.
All the ways that he's been framed, yeah.
And it's interesting with all these stories. I think back even to the 1908 riots, Springfield riots, and how supposedly the African American male, the Caucasian female, and then the family finding out, and all the riots that ensued from that. There's a lot of same story. Tale as old as time. Unfortunately, it keeps being replayed.
Right.
But in terms of the book, it's not only about that story in terms of that circumstance, right? Because that would probably be just one chapter. There's actually a lot more to it that people are not aware of as to why it was so important in our history.
Right. Well, the first third of the book is just establishing the characters, if you will, kind of understanding who these people are. And that's purposeful. It's purposeful because it is the story of a mother and son. And when we come to know Emmett Till, we come to really be connected to him, and we feel the pain of the loss so much more when we finally get to the part where we are discussing his lynching. So there is that. There's the personal story, which is engaging, and it's in his mother's words, in her voice. So it reads, as some people have commented, almost like a novel or like a film, because you can kind of visualize her sitting at her kitchen table telling these stories as a grandmother might tell stories to her grandchildren. But there is that middle section of the history that connects this story to everything that was going on. As I mentioned, Brown versus Board of Education and the backlash that was occurring at the time to keep Brown from being enforced. And we know that Brown is a case that arises in the education system, and segregation of schools, separate but equal, was no longer the law of the land. But it really had impact in so many other ways, because, as I mentioned, it redefined legal rights of blacks and whites. So the people who were most invested in segregation began to push back, and they pushed back in the most violent way. The summer Emmett Till traveled to Mississippi, there were 2 other murders in the area near where he was visiting. People who were registering people to vote, for example, were killed just for exercising their rights. So this is the kind of environment he lived in. The mistake, though, that people make is to assume that there's this notion of Southern exceptionalism, that all this
racism is a Southern
that it all existed in the South and everything else in the rest of the country was okay.
Yeah.
Racism was something that was very much a part of the American system. It's very much a part of our history. And as Malcolm X would say so many years later, the Mason-Dixon line was the Canadian border.
Right.
So we cover all of that in a way that helps to understand this story and this personal loss, because that comes through, but also the historical context of it. And we do that with the purpose in mind of helping people understand that we're all connected to this system. We're all invested in what this country is and what we need it to become. In fact, there's a passage I can read you here just to set it up, and it also helps us to understand the title of the book. Emmett Till's body was discovered. His murderers threw him in the river, weighted him down with a 75-pound gin fan, figuring he'd never be seen again. Okay, and as it turns out, there were a number of bodies that had been thrown in that river. There are a lot of undocumented murders, lynchings of black people. In fact, the house where he lived, and I only found this out recently, the house where he was staying in Money, Mississippi, was on a road that we always heard was called Darfield Road, Darfield. It was even spelled out for us, Darfield Road. Well, as it turned out, and I only discovered this when I interviewed somebody else recently, a related story, that they were mispronouncing it. They had heard it wrong. That the name of the road where Emmett Till's family lived in Money, Mississippi, his uncle, his great uncle, and his cousins, was actually called Dark Fear Road. And it was called Dark Fear Road because that was the road they used to carry black people down when they were going to kill them and dump them in the river. So it was kind of foreshadowing what was going to happen to this kid. He was living on the path to annihilation, basically. Wow. But his killers thought he would never be discovered again. His body, in effect, rose on the third day. He was discovered by a fisherman. Mamie Till-Mobley insisted that the body, his remains, be returned to her in Chicago against the wishes of Mississippi authorities. They wanted his body buried immediately in Mississippi for reasons we can...
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah. And she had the body, she inspected the body once it came to Chicago, identified the remains as her son, and then insisted on having an open casket funeral. His body lay in state for 4 days in a glass-enclosed, a glass-topped casket.
God.
And
did
something
she
like
think about
100,000 people filed by that casket, and they were energized, they were motivated to get involved. So it really did spark the mass movement of the civil rights movement.
That woman is a genius. If she, I mean, not, that's just like that she would think to do that. Is just
she was transformed in this moment. She was apolitical until this happened.
Wow.
But as a result of all that, these men, these white guys who came and got Emmett, were arrested, charged with murder, put on trial. Trial was over in less than a week, and they were acquitted by an all-white, all-male jury.
Of course,
yeah.
Of course.
But it became what some people called at the time the trial of the century. Okay.
Right.
After it was over, I have Mother Mobley kind of reflect on what was going on. To keep in mind, this is the mid-50s.
Mm-hmm.
Television, is now the medium of the moment. And we're moving forward from that. There was a lot of television news coverage of this event. There were reporters who came from all over the world to cover this. It was quite a huge event. So she talks about what it was like to move on from that moment, losing the murder trial, but now getting the attention of the media.
Wow.
We were in the television age now, and the media had seen the light. Many of the reporters who covered that travesty in Mississippi have been awakened to the great social and legal injustices confronting us. These were hard things to forget, and injustice would be a recurring theme playing out in the months and years to come. Those people down in Mississippi thought that they could stage manage a trial and force people to accept their warped version of reality. They thought wrong. Those lawyers down in Mississippi figured they had stopped the NAACP in its tracks. They miscalculated. They might have won a battle, but they were about to lose the war. Things would never be the same again. No one could plead ignorance. Everyone had to take responsibility for what our society had become. Anyone who did anything to make it happen, anyone who did nothing to stop it from happening. There could no longer be any innocent bystanders. For an entire nation, the murder of Emmett Till marked the death of innocence. Wow. So that's one of the three meanings of the title. Obviously, Death of Innocence refers to this kid who is an innocent, who is taken from us. Mm-hmm. It also refers to Mother Mobley's transformation in ways that we saw here. She's sacrificed her own innocence for this heightened awareness that she is gaining as a result of now learning that very point that I read, that everybody is involved, even if you're not involved. If you do nothing, you're doing something. Right. And suddenly she becomes politicized, she becomes an activist, and she goes out speaking, doing public speeches. This is a person who's never done any of this stuff before. But she realizes through her own experience that she's got to share this motivation with everybody else. And this is also a moment, everything's converging now. The legal strategy of the NAACP that led to Brown, that carved out legal rights in this country, and then the mass movement that grows out of this. Because only 3 months later, after the end of the Emmett Till trial, Rosa Parks takes her stand by keeping her seat on that bus in Montgomery. And she would say many years later, when she and Mother Mobley became friends, that she was thinking about a lot of things at that moment, but she was thinking about Emmett because it was all fresh in everybody's minds over there. So it inspired a lot. But it's really the bridge, if you will, between the legal strategy of the NAACP and the mass movement of the civil rights movement. They become now parallel tracks that carry us forward. The legal strategy working through the courts, working through Congress to enact laws, and the mass movement that gets everybody's attention. And Emmett Till becomes sort of the point of fusion of those two tracks.
And I'm not sure how familiar you are with California versus Mendez in 47 and being
Yeah.
a predecessor. So
Right.
a lot of ties in there for people that don't know. We're very fortunate to have Sylvia Mendez here on the show a while back, and her case was the catalyst and leading to Brown versus Board, basically a federal case. But it's interesting. I've actually done a bit of awakening even in your comments, because I can really the story of Mama Mobley really resonates with me in that I was very apolitical prior to coming to. I would say up to about the first year of my time here at the University of Illinois. I could honestly say I was apolitical in the sense I wasn't very conscious of the happenings of the world. I mean, generally speaking, I wasn't a complete idiot, but I knew that who so and so was, and who I could point to people, but I had no consciousness in that regard. And a lot of things happened to me during that period of time where it's like, wow, I can't just keep my mouth shut because the circumstance won't permit me. Like I won't be able to live with myself, I guess you could say. Yeah. And so, what was the story like for her after? Was it easy for her? Like you said, she went on speaking engagements, or?
Yeah, she. Again, this is a person who's been sheltered in her life. She never had much connection even to this fledgling civil rights movement. As far as she was concerned, the civil rights movement was a matter of black folks moving out of Mississippi. Because that solved all the problems. And then she found that the worst part of race hatred could be delivered right to her doorstep in Chicago. So there was no escaping it here. But the NAACP got her to go out on a speaking tour for a short term. And so she was able to make speeches. I mean, she went straight from the trial to New York, where she spoke at a rally before 10,000 people. I mean, suddenly everybody's coming to hear her. She was going around the churches. They were passing barrels to collect money for the cause. And then, we write about that in the story as well. A lot of that money was misdirected. But, that's another story. The point is that she was gaining quite a bit of national recognition. And then things changed for her, and the focus shifted, obviously, to the mass movement that was growing up in Montgomery with the bus boycott and a new leader who was emerging, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. And she wound up becoming a school teacher and saying, this is how I'm going to do my part, and taught in the schools for more than 20 years in Chicago. And then later on in life, became a public speaker again, an activist, and that's how we knew her toward the end of her life.
So she basically sort of hid away within educational in the sense that she changed her dynamic and engagement, like her civic engagement. She decided to build new leaders rather than to keep.
And that's exactly how we describe it in the book. That she felt that there were many different important functions with the connection to the civil rights movement. There is the movement itself. There are people who are marching. There are people who are lobbying for changes in the law. But there also are people who are needed to prepare everybody else to take advantage of the opportunities that were going to open up once the laws of the country had changed. And in the mid-'60s, they did, with the Civil Rights Act, voting rights legislation, and on. So she saw as her mission preparing all these young minds to take advantage of these new opportunities, because there would be no excuses. Once the laws change, it can't be that you're not ready. You had to be ready to do that. And she saw that as a vital part of the struggle.
And can you give the people the title of the book again, and who was actually the publisher of the books, just so we know?
Death of Innocence, the story of the hate crime that changed America. The hardcover was published by Random House, and the paperback is published by Ballantine, which is a division of Random House.
Okay. And how has the reception been to the book?
It's been very good. I mean, it's interesting because as we were preparing the book, the bulk of it was written after Mother Mobley died. But she was kind of giddy thinking about having the opportunity to go out and talk about it. So everything was done with an eye to putting her out on the lecture circuit so that she could share the story with people. And then she died. And we had an accelerated publishing schedule. She died on January 6th, 2003, and the deadline for the book was April 1st. So I spent about 2 weeks walking around bumping into walls because I missed her so much, and it was a painful experience for me. And then I realized, oh my gosh, I got a deadline to meet. And when you read the contract and you see you have to generate 100,000 words, that makes you very serious about the work. But since it was published in October 2003, I've gotten invitations to go all over the place to talk about it. People are
all
always
over the world, including the show.
Yeah, exactly. Which reaches the
to my closet. Welcome to my closet.
The far edges of the universe, right?
Yeah, I almost fell off the map.
But it's important because not only television and newspaper interviews, but also public lectures and book clubs. I mean, there are a number of book clubs who have invited me to come and talk about this story, and not just Black reading groups, but white reading groups, integrated reading groups. I've talked to affluent people in the Jewish community on the North Shore of Chicago who liken this to experiences of oppression in the Jewish experience as well. So a lot of people. It's interesting because we also won a few awards with this book, including the Robert F. Kennedy Book Award special recognition, and it was interesting in that regard because when I remember one day I was just walking down the street and I said, we should go for that award, and contacted the people representing me at the time and told them they should apply for it, and then we turned around and we won it. But the notice of the winning was quite striking to me because I'm sitting at home just whatever I was doing. Call comes in, I see on the caller ID Kennedy Robert, and it had a Northern Virginia area code, and I'm thinking, before it sets in, Kennedy Robert, do I have a call out to a Robert Kennedy? In that, split second eternity, it hit me, and then I answer the phone, and I hear this voice on the other end. Christopher, I've been looking for you for 3 weeks. This is Ethel Kennedy. I'm thinking, oh my gosh, okay. First of all, that she still has his name on the bill.
All right.
Yeah, and second, that she makes the calls herself to let people know they've won the award. And she was really excited about it. In fact, her picture is in the book. Wow. Because Mother Mobley appeared at the dedication of the Civil Rights Memorial in Montgomery, Alabama, and a bunch of people who she was representing Emmett, who was one of the martyrs of the Civil Rights Movement, whose name is inscribed on this marble tablet by Maya Lin, the person who designed the Vietnam Memorial in Washington. Okay. And so they had a number of people from the families of people who have been slain. And Ethel Kennedy was there. Chris McNair, whose daughter Denise McNair was one of the 4 little girls who was killed in the 16th Street Baptist Church bombing, and so many other people. And there she is on the podium. So we had that connection. And it was really a magical moment. And she autographed my book when I went for the award. So that was quite special.
That must have been super cool. And one other thing I wanted to ask you about was in terms of this project is. I know you've been in trying to get it to be developed into some sort of screenplay or to be produced for television or for movies or whatever. What has that process been like so that people can be educated? Because I know me personally, I was curious, and that's one of the main reasons I wanted to invite you on, not just that story, which was dynamic, but also to ask you what that process is like. Because I figured I'm probably going to make a couple movies, you know what I'm saying? I might as well find out, from somebody who's in it right now.
Okay, you ready to take notes? Yeah.
Well, I think we're recording.
It's really frustrating. Because if you want to make Booty Call into a movie, it'll get done overnight, basically, and it looks like it. It looks like
somebody call me.
No. Yeah, exactly.
Part 3 is coming up.
But to do something that really seriously questions structural racism in this country, it makes it a lot more difficult. So we've had a lot of people who've been interested because it's a compelling story. In fact, I was being pressured by my agent even before the book was finished to sign a deal. And I had people, I'm not kidding, I was sitting there trying to write the book, and I'd get 3-way and 4-way calls from people representing producers who wanted to have me lock up an option before the book was even done. So the pressure started right away. It is a compelling story, and everybody can see the cinematographic qualities of it. But there's been I've talked to so many big stars who wanted to option it and appear in it, but we wanted to control the creative product. They wanted to take an option out on the book and then control how the story was told. Well, we had promised Mother Mobley, I have collaborators on this, I promised Mother Mobley before she died that we would never let that happen.
Right.
She had told me once that people have done all kinds of things with the story. They've taken Emmett's name, they've taken her name, and they just fictionalize the rest of the story. She didn't want that, and in fact, in this one very poignant moment when we talked about doing a movie, she said, "It won't be Ghosts of Mississippi, will it?" One of those stories where they bring in a white hero, right, as the vehicle to tell the story.
Right.
So we promised her that wouldn't happen. So in order to do that, I had to put it in my contract that when the book was optioned, that I'd come on as all these things: the writer of the screenplay, a co-producer, so that I could say something about the writing, because you can be a writer and then somebody else comes in and changes it. Yeah,
like nice try.
Yeah, I'm also a lawyer, so I know something about contracts. And so that took a lot to get people to agree, and it was mostly my agent I had to get to agree to something like that, because they just want to do a quick deal. So that's lesson number one. When you get to this point where you're dealing with these people, the agents always want to do a quick deal because they get their money. They get their money. And then everybody else wants to have control, and that's what the big fight is in Hollywood. Mm-hmm. As a writer, I was just used to writing stories, and the only person you deal with basically is an editor who will comment, and you make the appropriate changes. In Hollywood, it's all about people controlling the story and telling it their way. So we've had to resist that, and that's made it a slower process. We were actually optioned by HBO for 2 years, and that was good. They were good people. The executives there really get it, but even there, everybody wants to put their fingerprints on it, so it just took a long time, and we decided not to re-up. So we have a script, and people say it's a strong script. There are actors I could name who wanted to get in it over time, but now we're going to go out in the market and get financing. So if you have a few $1 million, lying around,
check them out.
Yeah, exactly.
I think I might have something.
We can strike a deal.
No, I don't got anything.
But we know it's going to be made. People have seen the script; they really like it. They're ready now to tell this kind of story.
The people are clamoring in the back to ask, who are the actors? Who are they?
Are they? Okay.
You want to name drop some names out there? You can stay with this camera shot.
Well, let's see. There have been some people who have made some other movies who are quite significant. Yeah, I think I'll let it go at that. They know each other. It's so interesting because I've heard stories of people who have gotten on planes, two actors sitting next to each other,
right.
And one actor was reading the script and said, "Oh, you're trying to get in that too?" So yeah, it's been kind of interesting.
Okay, and then so you right now the project is on pause, or is it done? Or are you still trying to do?
I actually just got a message from the director saying he's got somebody who's interested in putting together the financing, so we'll see how that works. Okay. And the director, by the way, I should mention, is James Mall, and he is he's an Academy Award-winning documentary director who was the founding executive director of Steven Spielberg's Shoah Foundation. So he's a protege of Steven Spielberg, so that's kind of cool. And he's a collaborator on the script as well.
Fantastic. I'm going to go ahead and do something a little bit different now.
Okay.
I'm going to name a few people. As I name their names, I want you to give one word about them, and if you want to expand, whatever word comes to your mind, doesn't matter to me, good or bad, you totally do it. Ready?
I don't know.
First person, Barack Obama. One word.
Brilliant.
Okay. Do you want to expand on that, or is that just
Well, the take on him is that he deliberates. He also wants to hear from a number of people, and that's a good thing in order to make the decision. The concern is that he might think a little too long about some of the decisions he makes. And on the right, people resent what they perceive as the professorial image, and for all kinds of reasons that we talked about in the construct. That makes him elite. That makes him a person who steps out of his place. So now suddenly, having the brightest person around as a president is not what we value. Having somebody who shares our values is what we value. Right. So somebody we want to have a drink with, a beer, as in the case of George Bush, or I guess somebody I
get him off the bar.
I don't know what we want to do with Michelle Bachmann and Sarah Palin, but these are the kind of people. I mean, think about it. How sort of average has become like the new thing to value, largely because it's white and not black. So yeah.
Herman Cain. One word.
Sell out.
You want to expand on that one?
I don't think I do.
Okay. Let's go into make it more local here. Using the one-word description again. Champaign County Police Department Chief Finney. One word. What comes to mind when you think when I say his name, R.T. Finney, Chief Finney? What comes to mind?
There are too many words. I think that's what the problem is.
Are they all 4 letters and 5 letters?
You know, and yeah.
Okay. City manager Steve Carter.
I don't know that I have one word for him, but I have had some interaction with him, and I know he wants to do the right thing. So I would be a little cautious.
Spike, do you want to call us now?
Yeah, I'd be a little, yeah, exactly. I'd be a little cautious about characterizing him too harshly, because I know he does think about some things that he wants to get right. So
Right.
he actually asked me to talk about this book.
Really? Oh,
Yeah.
wow. What about Champagne Mayor Don Gerard?
I think he's caught in a tight spot.
Mm-hmm.
Again, wanting to be responsive and not knowing exactly how to do that in the right way.
What about State's Attorney Julia Wright?
I'm not going to comment.
The lawyer over here, man. Pleading the fifth before we even got to it. Well, is there anything else you'd like to tell folks about either your projects, the work with the book, anything else you'd like to say for an aspiring writer, educator who may be thinking about pursuing a career in education or just being a writer or journalist in general? Some advice you'd like to give to them?
Yeah, well, if you're going to write, you need to write, and you need to read. You need to read what everybody else is producing. You need to read what does get published, so you know pretty much how to tune your mind, how to tune your skills to publishable work. But you also have to go with what you feel. You have to do what's in your heart. And this was a work of great passion for me. So there was no problem for me doing the all-nighters it took to get it done in that very short time frame. I mean, think about it, 100,000 words in about 3 months. So you do what you can't help doing, basically. Read everything you can read, write all the time, and eventually you're going to get something that is publishable. And also let people read it. And I don't mean just your family, because they're always going to tell you everything you do is great. But find somebody who can give you a sound, critical appraisal of your work. And in terms of getting published, I mean, the best thing to do is to start small and to look at little things that you might be able to do. Every publication has a section that's kind of friendly to freelancers, that does little tidbits of this and that most people can wrap their words around. And if you can sell something like that and get it published, that leads to something else and something else, and it begins to grow. Eventually, you'll have best-selling book.
Just like that.
Just like that. Overnight success.
You heard it here first.
Yeah.
Well, we'd like to thank Professor Chris Benson for coming on the show. After so much time of wanting to get him on here, you can appreciate now, having heard the story of his project, of why we thought it was so important and why we thought he'd be a great guest and whose views we'd like to share with you. Obviously, when you have labors of love like this, it's much easier to pour your heart and soul into. And I want to thank you all for your time and attention. It's WRFU up here, Banner 104.5 FM. It's The Show. If you want to give us feedback, you can always email us at wrfu@theshow1045.com, or you can visit the website www.theshow1045.com. Again, it's wrfu@theshow1045.com. Website is theshow1045.com. Hit me with some feedback. Benny showing us to my grandmother, my godmother back in New York and Florida. Some I love out to all my family and friends. Digital text message, wherever you may be, far away, arm's reach, but also wherever it may be. Send our love out to you, and we're out.